So this talk is going to be a little less technical than the rest we've seen this week, but hopefully it's still going to be as fascinating, as thought-provoking as the other talks. And we're going to imagine, what if the GDPR was real? I should introduce myself properly, actually. Yeah, I'm John Looney. I've been doing SREcon for many years, and Lisa before that. Though my career is getting slightly further away from SRE as time goes on. I think these days I'm more of a platform engineer, which I think is an SRE who can type? Yeah, I know. I'm more of a full stack engineer in that I'm happy working with transistors or load balancers or data center automation or middle management. And that kind of wide view of the industry has led me to think about other topics like data privacy. And in fact, how it seems really difficult to square the products that we're building these days with European concepts around data privacy. Yeah, and it's a concern I have. I also have to apologize for the bait and switch. Myself and Simon had intended that this would be a sequel to our talk from, more of a conversation interview type thing we did about 7 years ago. Unfortunately, Simon, wonderful legal mind, fantastic knowledge of data privacy and all of the laws that touch on it, but not great at calendaring. So he's in New York speaking at a different conference. Oops. Yes, so we had spent a lot of time recently chatting amongst ourselves, trying to imagine what if the wheels of the legal system spun a little faster. What if they could apply all of the letters of all of the laws and the spirit of those laws in a reasonably prompt time? And it was a lot of fun to imagine that. That said, I am not a lawyer. Please take legal advice before doing anything catastrophic with your company's data or reputation based on anything we talk about here today. So, yeah, the best talks are always done by the people who make you feel like you can see into the future. That's why people loved TED Talks when they were good. They felt that they were prophetic in some way. 7 years ago when I interviewed Simon, to wrap up that, I think it was the second to me at SREcon, I asked him to make a bunch of really bold predictions about what the next few years might entail. If you want to check out the recording, it's up on the USENIX website. It's still actually kind of funny and still pretty good. But for those who don't remember the talk, I'll recap some of the interesting predictions. So Simon mentioned that the Irish Data Protection Commission didn't seem very independent. Since then, the European Parliament has demanded the European Commission sue Ireland for the DPC's failure to act promptly. This was in the EU's highest court. 2 new data protection commissioners have been appointed to ensure at least one of them was a technical expert and one of them was a legal expert. The EU Committee on Civil Liberties has visited Ireland to express their concern at how slow the pace of regulation is here. And they gave an example of 2 years to investigate TikTok without making a single finding or taking any kind of action. And this is, a problem. Simon also mentioned that safe harbor wasn't really a law. It was more of a pinky promise. This was the legislation that the US said, no, it's cool. You can send us European citizen data. We'll definitely respect it. It's since been struck down as being completely inadequate, leaving any company that relied on it to transfer their data to the US without any legal basis for doing so. So I hope you all stop that, because that would be terrible otherwise. We, at the time, suspected Privacy Shield, its replacement, wasn't legal either, because it didn't matter if a US company signed a contract saying, we will protect EU citizens' personal data, they'd still have to provide it without any oversight or redress to any US government organization that was allowed to access it. So it wasn't worth the paper it was printed in. The EU Parliament considered Privacy Shield to be insufficient as early as 2016. It just took till 2020 for it to get in front of a court and finally get ruled for once and for all that yes, it was definitely insufficient and terrible. In response, we got a brand new fellow in a fine top hat and mustache called the EU-US Privacy Framework. A very catchy name. They didn't bother coming up with a cool whatever marketing friendly name because it's probably going to get shut down in a year or two anyway, so there's no point making an effort. Okay, so we also talked a little about how Brexit might throw up some interesting issues, especially given that Theresa May and Boris Johnson were not known of their love of data privacy and maybe the stamina in sitting down with EU regulators to work out how they could keep regulatory alignment with the UK after Brexit. And worse yet, Theresa May was actually the one who wrote, or she had a hand in at least, and was pushing strongly the Snoopers Charter, which was a bunch of intelligence-friendly data laws that were, or data law that came in 2018 maybe, that would, even at the time before Brexit was mentioned, people were deeply concerned that it wasn't going to be compatible with EU laws. Finally, in August 2023, the UK Court of Appeal supported the Liberty Organization's case. They had an argument that the regime for sharing bulk aggregated data on citizens with other countries, you can probably guess which countries, was not legal. So there we go. Who could the UK version of Schrems be? Do you remember Schrems? He decided to sue Facebook and eventually got the Privacy Shield shut down. We need someone to do that in the UK if there's any volunteers. Just sue some random company who has allowed EU data to be stored in the UK and get yourself famous. It's going to be great. So we knew there was a bunch of those interesting decisions. They all came about as we predicted. We were wrong on one thing, though, and that was how long things were going to take. I thought it was going to be 2 years. Simon thought 3. It turned out to be 7 years before Privacy Shield and Safe Harbor after that would fall. However, the GDPR is only one law that's going to impact our industry. Let's take a look at a few more that you might not have been aware of. You don't need to read all of these. You can look them up on Wikipedia later. That's why we send out the slides. But I'll kind of go through them. Collective redress is a new thing that came out in 2020. Hasn't been really used yet, but it is intended to make it easier for consumers to take mass action lawsuits against companies that have wronged them. It's a bit like the American version of class action, but with European characteristics. The EU doesn't really like the US approach, where lawyers seem to get most of the money from a class action suit, people get pennies, and there's also this weird thing where you have to join the class action suit and then there's only one allowed. Under EU law, you can take a mass action, and then when people see, oh, you got money, oh, you can take a second one, and then a third one. So it may be if 1,000 people sued, you might have, the first one might be 50 people, the second one might be 250, the next one will be the rest of them. So that's fine. The other thing is that they can't be initiated by legal companies, they have to be by qualified entities. And qualified entities, it's a nebulous term, but loosely speaking, it's people who national governments think are sensible and are qualified and are not, troublesome, not too overly troublesome, but they have some kind of interest in this, some kind of expertise in knowing the reason for this mass action. Now, this isn't just data privacy, by the way. This will be allowed for many, many different things. But the idea being that if you're going to sue somebody because they were selling elephants that were bad-tempered, they'll probably want a qualified entity that might be a veterinarian or something like that. And they will be able to say, yep, you shouldn't have been selling elephants, etc. The version of this, Digital Rights Ireland, I hope will be one of them, because they seem to be very good experts at this kind of thing. It's going to be very exciting. And if you think this could be fun, I have great news for you. In 2021, Facebook leaked data for 530 million people. You can go to Digital Rights Ireland's website and you can kind of search for your details. And if they're there, they'll say, congratulations, your data was leaked. Give us your email address and we can join you to the mass action suit against Facebook. We've no idea. It might be €1,000, it might be €10,000, but it's free money. And I strongly recommend that you do, express your legal right to redress, because it's a hard-fought legal right and we should use it. So the second one, Digital Services Act, is also very interesting. Got very interesting last night. It made it very explicit that moderations and recommendations have to be transparent. There's some problems with this, but loosely speaking, you as a user can say, hey, why did my post get denied? Or why did that post not get denied? That really should have been. That looks like it's against policy. So you need to be publishing policies. You need to be showing how your decisions get made. There's a slight problem with this in that the most effective way of having a moderation policy today, and every company does this, where you're not fair. You're not completely fair. And what I mean by that is, any policy, there's things like, oh, that post was very close to the policy, or that advertisement was, no, slightly against policy because we ban, I don't know, weapon sales, and technically, you know, a hockey stick could be a weapon. So you'll just do them like that. And the idea of that unfairness, that some people that should be allowed post get rejected and some that should be blocked are allowed, but in that gray area, it makes sure that no one knows where the line is so that everyone is careful. And that makes for a much better environment. Unfortunately, that will no longer be legal. You'll have to publish your policy and then prove that every decision you made matches that policy. This is going to be a huge, huge change. And if you use ML in this, you need to make sure that that ML can be explainable, because you could be asked to explain that decision to a user or to a non-technical judge. And anyone got an ML model in work that might be tricky to explain to a judge who has no idea what a computer is? Yeah, it also has provisions actually, which is cool, against dark patterns. And these are any kind of UI changes or workflow changes that makes it harder for you to opt in or to opt out of something than the organization would like. The stereotypical version of this might be, click here to subscribe to this newspaper. And, oh, wait, I want to unsubscribe. Oh, no, you need to ring a phone number. That's not allowed anymore. Or even things like do you want to accept these terms and conditions? And that button's in red, and then you have to hunt around looking for the close button to reject the terms and condition. That's going to be banned. Yeah, the platform operators, big platform operators, I think anyone with more than 45 million people will be more impacted by these. And fines are going to be 6% of global turnover. So, ouch. These are the laws that have, oh, sorry, I should point out, these are regulations. These are already a law in the European Union. These, also regulations, I think the EU is more and more, for things that need, how could I describe it, clarity across many countries. They're now preferring to use regulations. And these are ones that become law across all the countries in the EU immediately, rather than directives where you tell people, you need to pass this into your country's law, and you can take 5 or 10 years to do it, and you can change it and tweak it and water it down if it suits your local industries. In this case, no, everyone's going to have the same laws, thankfully. Yeah, so the ones that are coming down the road, Digital Markets Act, it's going to be really interesting. This takes aim at the network effect that really brought the second generation of social media companies from small to enormous in a short period of time. It's based on the same legal theory that we use for quadratic voting in the European Parliament. You know, this idea that a company or country that's 4 times as big as another country shouldn't have 4 times the votes, maybe 2 times the votes. So you like, Germany should have, 100 MEPs, great, because it's got, 80 million people. Malta, well, we'll give you like 6 or 7. It's not going to be as many as Germany, but at least it'll balance those small voices to make sure that they're not completely drowned out. So again, a lot of this means companies that are larger are going to have more onerous regulations on them. The other cool things in that digital markets one, it's going to start requiring federation. It's going to require social media data export, so you can move from one social media network to the other and keep all of your posts and messages and contacts. It's going to not just be for computer stuff. Well, not just for social media, though. It's targeting anything where we think there's a dominant player and that might impact consumers. Browsers is a good example. Mobile phone operating systems, app stores, things like that. It's going to be very, very interesting. Obviously, this has been heavily criticized by industry for stifling innovation and being onerous and expensive to comply with. Oh dear. The e-privacy regulation is going to replace the old e-privacy directive. And remember I mentioned that regulations countries don't get to water them down. The text is what you get, and it's going to be common across the EU. Yeah, that's intentional for the e-privacy regulation because the old directive was just too watered down. One of the examples of this was they said you should warn people about cookies if they're impacting privacy. And so some countries passed laws that were very weird and anal, and other ones passed laws that didn't really have any legal force. And companies were like, I don't know what to do. Let's just put up a pop-up for every cookie everywhere and it'll be fine. And this irritates everybody. It makes them blind for cookies. The good news is with this new one, the new e-privacy regulation absolutely says, no, you just need a warning if it's privacy impacting. And you need to say, we impact your privacy with these cookies. So you'll get two things. Companies will be less likely to impact your privacy because it now looks obvious. And then the other one is those warnings go away most of the time. So when you do get one, you know you have to be concerned. Yeah, there's another interesting one about e-privacy is that it extends the existing legislation and protection for things like SMS messages and phone calls to all digital messaging. So you have a right to, everything has to support end-to-end encryption. If bugs in software let other people get at your messages, that's going to be a question the regulators are going to ask you about. And it's not just the message body, it's going to be the metadata too. Metadata too, and maybe even, what are those things called? Like attachments and the likes, which is quite strange, but it's how the phone networks were regulated for years, and they want to bring all our modern messaging up to that standard. One interesting bit that comes into e-privacy as well, and the wording was strange because I think it was translated from the Portuguese, but it's that consent is more important or is greater than software, I think was the exact wording. And what this means is, you go in and someone starts the app and it says, oh, you need to opt in to giving us all of this information and share your location data, blah, 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 blah. And then afterwards, you're going to go, well, I tick to enable all this. Now I'm using the software. I've changed my mind. I want to revert all of this. You have to make that easy. You have to make it as easy to revoke consent later. And if you say, oh, our software just doesn't do that. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's the giant fine. And you've got a week, and then you get another giant fine. So having bugs in software or software limitations is not an excuse. You have to make sure that everyone has complete control of where their data goes at all times. Oh, sorry, no, it's going to do the last one there. The Data Act it's still in its early stages. It could go anyway. There's a lot of people looking to get things into this. But the big idea of this is it's about data portability and in the most extreme versions. So one of the examples they'd given was, imagine you have a home speaker or whatever, and you've been using it for 3 years, and it has your search history, and it might have learned your voice, or it knows how to order things, blah, blah, blah. And you go, I'm selling that and buying one from a new company. Well, you should be able to do click, click, and move your history and everything else into the new one. So there's going to be a lot of data exports. The talk we had on Matrix, I think it was Matthew Hodges, earlier on today, he actually touched on this as well, where all messaging systems need to be interoperable. So that means you can use Facebook Messenger and you can talk to Google Chat or Hangouts or whatever. So maybe Google will have their 11 chat programs all interoperable. It's going to be very cool. Yeah, and they have to be interoperable with Matrix and other open source ones, and that's not an option there. It's been roundly criticized by companies for being difficult and expensive and stifling innovation, for a change. But what else it does? It's going to forbid gatekeeper services. Like, I suppose Amazon is big enough that it's a gatekeeper in that to make money you have to sell on Amazon, but they can't take that sales data and then use that to inform what products they should buy and sell themselves. They have to implement Chinese data walls inside their business to stop that happening. That's going to be interesting. And a fun one for SREs, actually. Here's a fun one. Cloud computing companies are going to have to make their stuff portable as well. So if you have 1,000 EC2 instances and they're all running away, you should be able to export them and move them onto Azure or whatever. I'm sure that's going to be amazing for many people. Lots of SREs smiling over, wow, I'm no longer locked into a single cloud. I'll be able to move around. Anyone working for a cloud computing company is probably thinking, whoa, so what? I have to take an export file of thousands of VMs, and I have to work out now how to import an DynamoDB into my whatever hosted Elasticsearch service. Because yeah, the lawyers, the courts, they don't care that the underlying database abstraction is wildly different. They just go, no, you need to be able to portable different things from into different places. And that might mean then that everyone will have, I don't know, start learning about a common abstraction maybe for cloud services. Like I've seen our IAM rules defined in Terraform. I have no idea how I'm going to export all of those out into some other services that wouldn't support Terraform, for instance. Yeah, that's going to be fun. Okay, so taken together, all these new acts from the EU are going to act in concert with the already significant impact of the GDPR to provide consumers with both a boost in the rights that they have and the means to enforce them. Each of the laws independently probably would have the same amount of impact as the GDPR did, but all 5 are going to land around the same time, like a 5-knuckle sandwich, as it were. It certainly feels that the way the internet and its applications and ecosystems are built isn't really compatible with the desire for the EU to protect its citizens. So it's going to be interesting. But it's happened before. So this talk, you've probably forgotten about this. This talk was named after Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, when she imagined what would happen if the world kept using pesticides as it had been in the 1960s, right? She painted very powerful visions of a world without insects. And without insects, all the songbirds would be dead, right? And it would be a horrible, horrible place. People couldn't imagine, like, what would happen in the future? We won't be able to feed ourselves because we need DDT to kill all the insects that are eating things. But we didn't starve, right? The humans are still alive. In fact, there's more of us than there was in the 1960s. So Europe has chosen this rights-based approach to privacy. It starts with the assumption that everyone has a right to a private life and control of their personal data. It's considered more important right than other people's right to a business model or law enforcement's right to get any information they have to protect people from vague and uncertain threats. These laws are written by people with memories of the Stasi and other organizations who knew what happens when organizations collect lots of data and use it for uses that it wasn't really consented to. So, yeah, let's talk about Looney, right? Everyone's favorite tech company, right? They're a huge company with offices all over the world, engineers all over the world. They give 24/7 support, so they have like POPs, offices, etc. They want to attract the best talent wherever they are, so they're based everywhere, right? Lots of remote work. They've giant data centers in loads of countries. They've points of presence everywhere. They offer email and chat and video and every digital service you can imagine. And because of this, they have lots of high-paid lawyers who've designed various privacy systems and policies to ensure they meet all of the GDPR obligations, right? They've decided not to hire people in countries with problematic rule of law issues. And they've made deals with very good relationships with law enforcement agencies all over the world so they can process legal requests, et cetera, very quickly. And how well do you think they're going to be doing, right, with respect to the GDPR? Just like every other company. So if a Looney engineer lives in a country where they can be required to share information on a EU citizen without independent oversight, perhaps under threat of obstruction of justice or some other charge, that's a breach. And that's pretty much a problem for any product that has user information from IP addresses to names. Looney have employees in the UK, for instance, right? So they're required to collect messaging metadata for the US intelligence agencies. Not cool under the GDPR. The United States versus Microsoft 2018 case has proven problematic for EU to US transfers, and it remains to be seen how the UK are going to deal with it. We do need that Schrems volunteer, by the way, for the UK case, just saying. So large companies, they might say, oh no, we might get a 4% fine. It's the cost of doing business, right? And better yet, any companies, no company has gotten a 4% fine. If they had, or they're up for it, it's been delayed and delayed and delayed thanks to, I suppose, systemic delays in how the DPAs and courts work. Most companies like Looney, they just don't see it as a thing that's going to happen. I think Facebook is the only one. They've got a pair of billion-dollar fines, and they're still appealing them. Now, technically, companies have huge exposure to compensation claims for losing or sharing people's data without their permission. We've not seen them happen in Europe yet. If we did, there would be very few internet scale companies that would be able to survive, right? These would be an extinction level event. But with mass claims now being specifically legislated for and grounds of claims that people can take a court case to, with these new laws, the chickens or other birds or whatever are coming home to roost. And that might be a bit of a foreshadow because, yeah, $1,000. Anyone know what we can get for data breaches? I think $1,000 is on the low end, some 20,000 if it's real harm has happened. We'll see. Now, you don't need to read all this. I'm going to go through it fast because that's what slides are for. You can look at these later. There's a few possibilities on how we can restructure the company's business models. Companies can create a company inside redo the company structure so that the primary company is inside the European Union and 100% independent from companies outside the EU. That means that no one in the EU reports to anybody outside the EU, so no one has a manager who could be pressured by law enforcement agencies or whatever. We need to then build and provision lots of data centers in Europe so that European data is stored in Europe. Or you can store the data outside Europe as long as none of the encryption keys for that data leave Europe or go into the hands of someone who's not an EU citizen. Technology licensing, maybe source code, IP addresses, source code and intellectual property and the likes could be transferred to Europe and owned by Europe and then licensed out to the subunits in other countries. That way, those countries can't be forced to put backdoors and stuff into code or forced to compromise software that would damage EU's citizens' privacy rights. So yeah, I suppose that's what technology licensing. And then lastly, I suppose, anytime a US or a non-EU user interacts with an EU user, you'd have to have federation. So you're not going to store the interaction, the post, et cetera, outside of the EU, but you kind of have to for chats. So we can do full-on federation, maybe go further than the Mastodon style, because we want to make sure as well that if you create a post or you send a chat with somebody and then later you want to delete that chat message, that better be deleted as well across the whole system. So employers, would you go for rehome? Any hands up? Who thinks their business would be happy to rehome? I actually had this theory that maybe that's why Alphabet was spun off out of Google so they could move Alphabet to Europe in a hurry. Yeah, like who reckons their company could afford to build out all their data centers in Europe? Hands. What about just like transferring IP to Europe? Like this is not crazy. The pharmaceutical companies did it just chasing tax. And they didn't even feel like they were pressured in because their business model had a problem. They said, yeah, we'll just rehome in Ireland or whatever, make a load of money tax-wise. Politicians will be complaining, it's fine. So it's not as crazy as you might think. And the last one, who reckons, oops, they would just go for, damn it. What is just, yeah. Who reckons then, yeah, we could do federation for all of our software systems? I think it's a few people. Okay, not too bad. Right, an alternative is other countries could respect human rights. Could happen, like it's happened before. Yeah, and they could apply those human rights to everybody and not just their citizens. It's a tricky one, but it could happen. Irritatingly, this is less and less likely than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. I think we're seeing a backslide on human rights in a lot of countries. Okay, but whatever, this has happened before, right? For centuries, the human right to bodily autonomy was not an inalienable right. Rich people maybe had it, but certainly the average farmer, et cetera, if they hurt themselves on a farm, like, sucks to be you, here's a walking stick and you're done, right? It just wasn't legally enforceable. Especially actually in industries like farming, mining, factories, construction sites, these places where people were working minimum wage jobs that were dangerous. They just didn't have legal representation. But in the early 20th century, as more and more people were being impacted by companies who were getting big and I suppose strong enough that they could go, we could make more money by making things less safe, more citizens were impacted by this. So the country started bringing in duty of care laws. And this allowed individuals to hold companies to account for the first time. Injuries from workplaces and from shoddy consumer products eventually had impacts on companies' profitability, and they started changing their business practices. So this is a famous photo, right? Like, none of these men could ever imagine a world where building sites were safe, right? They took the job knowing that 1 in 100 of them would die in any given year. And even as late as the 1970s, American large bridge projects assumed that 9 people would die in the construction of the bridge. And that was just the way it worked. They considered compensation for injuries and deaths, the tiny compensation that was there, just the price of doing business. No one in this audience could possibly imagine working in an environment that dangerous today. And none of those men could imagine a world where, if any of them got hurt or badly injured, that the compensation would be so high it would be cheaper for the construction company to make the building site safe rather than pay it. That transition took decades. It wasn't quick. And to those paying the fines, every tiny incremental change seemed enormous, outrageous, and then quickly normalized. This slide is a genuinely strange co-publication of the UK's Department of Work and Pensions and Health and Safety Executive. It shows the backlash against health and safety. It never really ended, right? This is a recent publication from a UK government department taking offense at often valid safety concerns at work. The backlash against data privacy will be the same. It will take ages, it will be ridiculous, people will make nonsense arguments, and they'll be producing that type of, anyway. We need to recognize, though, that the voices that continue to object against change over time will find themselves moving more and more out to the fringes of human society. Building sites will continue to require hard hats, and messaging providers will continue to roll out end-to-end encryption. So today's data industry is very similar to the construction industry of the 1930s, right? Before workers could sue directly for physical injury at work. An industry with, at the 1960s construction, they had little competence in ensuring safety. So protecting workers was difficult, it was expensive to systematize. It was a mess, right? They made mistakes. But over time, it became a competitive advantage and eventually became utterly normalized. And data protection, it's the world's newest fundamental human right? It's the biggest thing we've added since World War II. It's a difficult and long learning process, right? Because it impacts the data industry, governments, and even the products we're allowed to own. Like, make no mistake, there are products you are using today that you really love that are going to be illegal, and you just can't have them. Just like lawn darts. So there's also plenty of companies who have said, we're pulling out of Europe. So let's go over this. Expect, I'm not going to bother reading this, but expect lots of PR from very expensive PR companies for these companies against data privacy. It'll be better than the Alan Partridge-style propaganda you saw from the UK government earlier. Now, how is this going to pay out? So 65, Ralph Nader, he called out manufacturers for making unsafe cars. And he was attacked by car companies who had all sorts of bullshit, denying truth. They eventually were hauled in front of Congress, asked why they were lying, why did their immoral calculus, why did you think each life was worth $25,000, blah, blah, blah. Economists at the time were arguing, no, this is insane. People need to drive to work. If cars are safe, they'll be too expensive and people can't work. There was whataboutery, is Ralph Nader, does he just hate Chevy? Does he have shares in Ford? What's his real end goal here? And he was called out, I love this, he was called out in a book, it was it was a conservative newspaper in the US in 2005 as one of the most harmful books of the 19th and 20th century, along with other harmful books like Mein Kampf, Silent Spring, because it talked about environmentalism, and The Origin of the Species. So I know you laugh, right? But when I said these people will move out to the fringe, that's exactly what was going to happen. So expect them to attack the fundamental right to privacy in the same way. There is one last change driver, though, and it never fails to work over time. Do you know what that is? So We mentioned earlier there's a big delay between the idea of and the ubiquitous implementation of the bodily right to integrity. So 1932 is the first case. Look up the snail in the bottle. Very fun case, right? But once you allow citizens to take standing in court, things start changing, right? So who's going to win? Collective redress. It means that companies no longer have data protection commissioners as the primary threat, waiving a few % of global turnover as a fine. Oh, no. You're going to get millions of citizens all looking for €1,000 each. It's going to be too expensive to litigate. The enormous evolutionary pressure is going to act really, really quickly. And companies are going to go, no, anything that causes people to sue us, like, no, we just can't do it. But they don't know what's happening at the moment. I can imagine a lot of the DPCs, DPOs, anyone in data privacy, there's not a lot of skill, there's not a lot of wisdom, there's not a lot of great people. I see it, honestly, as the same way as the reliability industry, maybe, that SRE filled that gap in the mid-2000s. Data privacy is like that today. I can imagine an awful lot of SREs going, do you know what? Services are now reliable enough. Software is good, people know how to build stuff. We've got books, we've got best practice. Let's move into the next giant place to have impact, and that's going to be data privacy. Saying, oh no, I'm going to make sure that you're not going to get sued. This is going to be the same evolutionary pressure that, creating these jobs that gave us building sites with hard hats, porta cabins to eat lunch in, that gave us cars with seat belts, that gave us restaurants with chopping boards for meat and veg, or separate chopping boards for meat and veg, raw meat and veg at that. Same legislation gave us doctors who count their scalpels after an operation. It's a powerful force. It's going to be cool. So I've talked a lot about the past, the wrongs of the past, lessons we've taken from them, and some interesting changes. Humans' great ability is this power to read patterns and see that happened in the past, this must happen in the future, especially if it keeps them and their friends safe. So there's no reason this industry can't change and improve. It's all full of reasonably smart people, like when we want to be. And this is where I would have ended the talk, only the gift that keeps on giving. So this is a letter. It's a bit small, but you can read it. A letter sent to Twitter yesterday. Oh, sorry for dead naming Twitter, but it's still Twitter to me. Yeah, and it's the first time I've seen the Commissioner for the Internal Market talk about enforcing the Digital Services Act. So that was published, it was passed in January. It came into force in August. And yeah, now here we go. Twitter, we've got some Hamas propaganda, etc. on your site. You need to get rid of it. And you've got 24 hours to respond with proving to us that you're doing it or you're in breach of the Digital Services Act. Kind of interesting. Now, what's the worst way he could have responded? Prove it, dude. Yeah, no, you know. Yeah, you know, yeah. This is terrible. So yeah, 7 p.m. tonight is when Twitter have to respond to that. Interestingly, Twitter are not the only ones. Facebook got the same, slightly different letter, but they got it about an hour ago as well. So this is the future. We are living in the future. This is happening, people. It's going to be awesome. So thank you very much.